Are we ready, John? Good evening, everyone. Mayor McFadden here. We're privileged to have a presentation from Ed and his team. Ed, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ed Marcus of Amawal Consulting, and together with my colleague, Sean Lynn, we're pleased to be with you this evening to present a brief summary of the results of our water and sewer rate study and our observations and conclusions. We could turn to the next slide, please. The background and purpose of our work is outlined here on slide 2.
Civic engage.
Okay, if we could go back to slide 2 for just 1 second.
Today's meeting, the board meeting, has disappeared from the website.
All right, Ed.
And
Yes.
Emergency to fix it. Thanks. Bye.
So the background in terms of the water system and the sewer system, roughly about the same number of customers within the village. But of course, the water system serves about 300 customers in the town as well. Water is charged on the basis of usage with a minimum and a fixed charge. Sewer is charged based upon property taxes at the present time. Really, the purpose of our work was on the water side to consider whether a rate differential might be appropriate between the village and the town. And on the sewer side was to estimate sewer rates that would enable the village to charge sewer customers directly and discontinue the use of sewer taxes to fund the sewer system. And that is really the primary focus of our work. We would be happy to take questions during the presentation or wait to the end. That's really your discretion. I'll begin the presentation and then Sean will review customer characteristics for the sewer system and the rate options that we looked at. And then I'll return with a little discussion of policy decisions, conclusions, and assumptions. Move to slide 3, please. Slide 3 really presents just a little summary of background information. A couple of things that we find interesting. Number one is that the village and the town are currently charged for service using the same rates. As we'll talk in a moment, we typically see, very often see a distinction between the rates for the owner of the system versus outside customers. Unpaid water bills in the village are applied to property taxes, so the rate of bill collection is 100%, which is great. Unpaid water bills in the town are not subject to the same collection techniques. The village does charge a 10% fee on the outstanding balance, but there's a pretty good balance of receivables that have accumulated over time. The last numbers that we looked at were about $250,000 versus annual billings of about $366,000. If we can move to slide 4, please. Water rate differentials are something that we see frequently in the industry, that is applied to non-owners of the water system. It's well supported by the rate setting guidance materials of the American Water Works Association on the water side, and even on the sewer side, the Water Environment Federation also recognizes it too. Really an appropriate premium to be charged to non-owners. As the owner of the system, you're responsible for paying expenses, including extraordinary expenses, and then trying to recover from your customers who may or may not be interested in participating in those expenses. You also have the risk of litigation. There's kind of a series of risks that you have as the owner that the non-owners don't have. And some public state utility commissions around the country have standardized premiums that they allow the owner to charge to the non-owner of the system. They're commonly used by peer utilities inside and outside of the state of New York. A few examples here: Monroe County Water, Elmira Water Board, Niagara Falls Water Board, and Binghamton Water as well. Slide 5, please. Observation on our part is a modest premium of, say, 10% would offer the village some compensation for the responsibilities and risks that it bears of water system ownership. We'd also like to highlight that it might be appropriate to consider some form of second premium to compensate for years in which collections are less than billings due to the absence of collection enforcement tools, or unless there's other ways of alternative collection enforcement that would be possible as well. But again, our primary suggestion is to implement a modest premium as a first step on water rates for customers outside of the village. We could move to slide 6, please. Now shifting to the sewer system. Slide 6 presents a summary of potential cash flow estimates, and we presented it for the upcoming fiscal year of 22-23 out for a 5-year period out to 26-27. And this is a little bit busy, but what we're trying to show here are the revenue requirements for the sewer system based upon information provided by the village in terms of operating expenses and also capital construction, which is a combination of cash finance construction. So it's cash that is raised from user rates to pay directly for construction projects, as well as debt service on perhaps some additional more expensive investments in the sewer system. And the debt service, we assumed, I believe, about $200,000 a year of capital investments with the suggestion that New York State EFC be tapped if available to provide some low interest loans to the village for that. And the debt service reflects the repayment of principal and interest on those loans. We'd also suggest incorporating provisions for reserves for the system, because in water as well as in sewer, things happen over time and there's a need for additional resources to be available. So it's good to have appropriate reserves in place. One of the things that's kind of interesting about this, as you'll see in terms of fiscal year 22-23, is a little bit of subsidy from the general fund because of the timing of bills and the way they would go out. The assumption is that you would only get about 3/4 of, since the bills are sent out quarterly, that you'd only get about 3/4 of a full year's revenue in fiscal year 22-23. So the full year revenues would kick in the following fiscal year. So the first year, we're assuming no deposits to reserves, and we're assuming a little bit of a general fund subsidy with the intent of then getting that paid back in subsequent years. If we could turn to slide 7 now. And Sean will now outline some of the customer characteristics that are needed to develop rates.
For slide 7, the table at the bottom of slide 7 summarizes the village water usage for the past 3 years, while the graphics on the right side of the slide illustrates the same information. As we can see from both the table and the graphics, village water use fluctuates from year to year. For the purpose of a projection, we use the 95% of the lowest water use from the past 3 years as a basis for computing usage-based rates. Actual consumption in any given year may be higher or lower than the projected amounts. If we can move to slide 8. For our calculation, we consider 3 sets of customer characteristics for calculation of sewer rates. Set A assumes 100% of annual water use. Set B assumes 100% of water use less 15% irrigation allowance for the summer quarter 3Q. And set C assumes 100% of water use of 1Q, 2Q, and 4Q. For all 3 sets of customer characteristics, we adjust the usage to account for seasonal users on wells or septic tanks, among others. Slide 9, please. We also, for each of the set of the customer characteristics, we also consider 3 options for calculation of sewer rates. Option 1 is a pure usage-based rate. Option 2 are both usage base rate and the fixed charge. Option 3 builds on option 2 and further assumes a minimum quarterly use of 8,500 gallons per quarter, which is the same as the minimum for water. The preliminary cash flow on slide 6 pointed out, the cash flow assistance from the general fund may be needed in the beginning, given only 3 sets of customer payments are anticipated in fiscal year 22-23 due to the timing of the quarterly bills. Slide 10, please.
There's 732
Slide 10 and 11 provide some rate option
32 slots.
observations.
Perfect. Total. Good.
All of the 3 rate options examined in our calculation promote fairness and equity by shifting sewer funding from property taxes to user charges, given that property tax doesn't have anything to do with the sewer use. Property tax should decline if the sewer charges are implemented. We also wish to point out that a fixed charge and minimum reflect common practice in the industry. Slide 11. Water consumption is used as the basis of sewer rate calculation and therefore is critical for revenues. As mentioned previously on slide 7, water usage varies significantly from year to year in the past 3 years. We made assumptions to projected water use. There are no assurances that actual water use will not be less than what is assumed. Therefore, it will be prudent to plan for a backup source of funds. The preliminary calculation anticipates that about 1.1 million of sewer improvements will be implemented and financed during 2023 through 2027.
Okay, I'd like to continue now with the next couple of slides and with our recommendation. There are lots of potential policy decisions to think about. We made a number of assumptions, but just kind of some highlights in this list here. The degree of reimbursement of support services from the sewer fund to the general fund. Some folks have 100% of support services costs covered by their sewer rates. Others do not. Others have a lesser amount. We've assumed New York State EFC financing for II-related capital construction work, which obviously requires application and discussion and working with them and so forth. They're really the best deal in town, and we kind of assume that that's a reasonable approach policy-wise, rather than having the village issue its own debt. How much contingency to include in annual budget and rate setting? How much in capital spending to be paid for each year through revenues versus debt, in terms of cash finance versus debt finance. Most important is the degree of general fund backup for sewer fund shortfalls, really in the beginning until the system gets up and has a track record and gets operating, and so forth. Desired levels of reserves and so forth. Allowances for irrigation, if any, in computing sewer use. And also special circumstances, because there are customers that use well as opposed to the village water system. So a methodology would have to be in place in order to charge them for sewer. It could be, for example, based upon average water use for single family homes and so forth. Customer allowances perhaps for water not discharged to sewer. Bottom line overall is we would suggest as simple as possible, especially to get things off the ground. And then modifications can always be made down the road to make it perhaps a little bit more comprehensive. We can move to slide 13, please. So our suggestion is option 3A, which we considered further for calculating a sewer charge, and that is a unit charge per 1,000 gallons of water use, a fixed charge per account per quarter, and a minimum quarterly use of 8,500 gallons. The fixed charge per account, the minimum quarterly of 8,500 gallons is the same structure used for water charges. And since a high percentage of water customers are also sewer customers, it should be easy to understand and also easy to administer because it's basically going to the same type of structure. We prepared a preliminary estimate of the rates and the annual charge for an average single family residential property, again, based upon the data that was provided by the village. And the rates and the potential annual single family residential charge are illustrated there on the bottom of slide 13. And our last slide is slide 14. This slide just highlights a couple of key assumptions. But obviously there's quite a bit more involved, but we have no allowance in the rates for uncollectible bills. We assume that that same 100% collection factor on the water side would carry forward to the sewer side. We assumed a quarterly fixed charge of $35, and that would really go towards the cash finance construction as well as payment of debt service. Those costs don't vary at all if consumption should change. And we see throughout the industry a trend towards putting more and more charges into the fixed category so that it's not tied towards changing consumption. With the minimum use per quarter and the average annual single-family residential consumption that we used, again, based upon the 3 years worth of historical data from the village, was about 75,000 gallons per year. That concludes our presentation. Be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
All right. Thank you very much, Ed. And we are going to, the village hall is empty. So we're going to go directly to people that are joining us by Zoom. And right now, everyone's microphone is turned off. And if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand symbol and we will open your mic. Is that all the people that we have on? Should be, yeah.
Yeah, about 13. 12 with village.
Chris, since you're not here, is there anything you would like to ask?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Ed. I appreciate that the presentation. Very informative, very thorough. On the water side, I think it would be helpful if you could just dive a little deeper and give an example of the burden the village has owning the water system, and why it might make more sense for a premium to be paid by the town users. And the reason I'm asking is because right now, when we have a water fund, and if there's a major repair done in the town, it's coming out of the water fund, not the general fund for the village. But maybe there's a circumstance where the village is going to have to, maybe the water fund is depleted for a major issue, and the village is going to have that burden. Could you kind of dive into that so everybody could understand?
Well, I think, throughout the industry, there's been a lot of experiences of things happening in the industry in terms of unexpected water quality, in terms of contamination, in terms of other unexpected, unforeseen expenses that occur. And you'd kind of assume that, on a contractual basis, that your outside customers would just pay up, their share if you increase the rates to cover that and so forth. But, the issue of whether someone can come back and argue that, well, the village should have done something differently, or the village should have, done this or done that, and the possibility of litigation and things of that. As the owner, you have the responsibility to make sure on quality and reliability and so forth. And if things don't happen perfectly, because things do happen in water and sewer systems over time, the fact that you have the responsibility, but you're not getting at the present time an extra dollar for that responsibility and risk that you bear on the system. That's why the associations, the industry associations, endorse the idea that the owners should get some form of premium for the fact that they do have that responsibility and they have that risk. We are actually assisting a client right now in litigation that on the sewer side, they are providing sewer service, a pipeline through their community. Another town is using it, and that town is unhappy with the compensation provisions of the agreement, so they sued our client. And our client has to defend itself. There's no guarantee they're going to get, any money back out of it, and or their legal fees or anything like that. So, as the owner, you have certain risks, and at least something modest makes sense. And as you look around the country in different places, it's a very common practice to have the owner get some form of premium.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. And I don't know if you happen to know, but how does our water rate of $13.71 per $1,000 compare to other municipalities in New York?
We actually didn't do the comparison. So I have to apologize. I couldn't answer that question right away.
Okay.
You know what, I can recommend, trustee Casker, we have that 2017 summary from NICOM. And it's an Excel spreadsheet and it lists every municipality in New York State and all of the rates are there. So we can pull that out and I can send a copy. I think, Ed, I probably sent you a copy very early on when we first started consulting. And Chris, you may have it. If not, I'll send it to you tomorrow.
It has both water and sewer.
It has water and sewer. Yeah, if people are doing it. Okay, would that be satisfactory?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. I just thought it'd be helpful to have that out in public.
Right. Yeah, that's a great idea. I can post that. Yeah, that's a good idea. Ed, so will people that have septic tanks and no access to our sewer, be it in the town or in the village, will they be treated differently than people that are using our sewer system?
That would represent a policy decision for the village. We would kind of assume that that would be the case, particularly in terms of operations, because they're not providing wastewater into your sewers, and as a result, impacting the cost of treatment at the treatment plant and so forth.
Yeah, I think that John and Tinka and I wanted to make it clear that we didn't think that it was appropriate that those people were paying into the sewer like everyone else, in the sense that one of my main goals is to make this fair and equitable across the board. Now, for example, when you're putting it into property tax, you might have someone with one bathroom and who's a weekender and a kitchen, essentially paying the same thing as, say, the school or the club, and so based on tax rates. So putting it into property tax is not an efficient way. There's only a handful of municipalities of the state that do that. But do you want to touch on the equity issue of what we're trying to accomplish?
Yes, Mayor. And in fact, your illustration of someone who perhaps has a weekend home, I think is quite helpful, because the other features, of course, of the features of the structure are based upon consumption, as well as a fixed charge, as well as a minimum charge. And really the purposes of the fixed charge and the minimum, the intent is that when that family with the weekend home comes to visit, that they're using the system, so they do get charged for the water use and the resulting operation and maintenance costs. But also, even if they're not there, the system is, you have to build the system, you have to provide capital investments into the system so that it's ready to serve when they arrive. And that is really kind of one of the features of the fixed component of the charge, as well as the minimum, is that everyone should really contribute fairly to the fact that you have to have that system there ready to go and ready to serve when someone comes in and starts using water.
Thank you. I'd also like to point out for the public that taxes are going to be lower this year. And there's two reasons. One is because of our efficiency in managing the budget. And the other is because we've taken the expenses to run the sewer department out of the general budget and put them into a sewer fund, which we've been focusing on tonight. And when you take those dollars out of the general budget, it's no longer taxable. And so that should be very clear to people. What's going to result is that people, for example, that don't use our sewer system, that have a septic, are going to be very happy because they're only paying a minimum or they're paying nothing. And people that have, are the biggest users might pay quite a bit compared to what someone else pays. And so whether or not the lowering of the taxes means that every user is going to pay less or some may pay more, I think it's clear that the situation will result in some people paying more and some people paying less. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think that's a fair representation, Mayor. And also, as Sean pointed out too, it's just an equitable approach because the value of a property really has nothing to do necessarily with the burden that it places on the wastewater system. It's really a matter of having, again, that ability to serve as well as the water use that then becomes the sewer use that goes down to the sewer treatment plant and has to be treated with associated electrical costs and chemical costs and labor costs and so forth, so that it's basically a fair and equitable approach that's accepted throughout the country.
Okay, now you mentioned in your option that you presented, the one that you recommended, which we've agreed on. But you did say that we haven't made a decision on whether to charge people that don't use the system. I'm just going to ask Tinka and John if that's their recollection as well, or had we decided we're not going to charge them?
I believe we're only going to charge people that contribute to the sewer.
Right,
So
And now-
people that are on septic,
that's what I thought.
people that don't have any connection to sewer
Mhm.
would not be charged sewer.
I just wanted to make that clear. There won't be any charge for people that don't use the system.
Mhm.
Now, there are conditions, however, John, that we might want to mention that relate to firms that, houses that are only using wells,
Mhm.
but they're also using our septic system.
Yes.
And so that's like a hybrid situation. What is our approach there?
We're going to have to install a water meter on their system so we can calculate the amount they contribute to the sewer.
Right.
So then they won't get a bill for water since they're pumping it off their own property,
Mhm.
but they'll get a bill for sewer.
Ed, did you hear that?
Yes,
Okay, and does that make sense to you?
yes, it does.
Okay. Let me go back to the floor, to the Zoom folks for a minute. Does anyone on Zoom have any questions for Ed or Shan?
I have one more if nobody else from the public
Please.
has one. Ed, in your presentation, you discussed the water rate that was the difference between commercial and residential. I don't recall seeing anything for sewer rates where there'd be a difference between commercial and residential. Is that accurate? And if so, what's the reasoning behind that?
We kept it constant. We had no differential in between. Typically, if you kind of look around the country at different rate structures, most folks do have a uniform rate for water consumption related to sewer use. On the water side, they may vary it quite a bit, but a lot of that, I think, has the history of US EPA years ago when it was providing federal funds for infrastructure improvement for wastewater. They were requiring that essentially that the rate be uniform, that there be no distinction between classes, other than if an industry, say, for example, was putting in high strength wastewater, then they could get charged separately for the additional loading that they were putting onto the system. But in terms of just when you're talking single family versus, say, small stores and so forth, where the waste load is essentially kind of similar in terms of strength to the system, the idea that EPA put out a long time ago was basically uniform rates, and that was the most appropriate. And like I say, if you look around the country, you'll kind of see that some people have distinctions, say Washington, D.C., on the water side between residential and commercial, but on the sewer side, it's uniform for all customers.
Great. Thank you so much for that explanation.
Sure, our pleasure.
Do you have any questions?
No.
Okay. John, do you have any questions? Ms. Tinka?
No.
I'll go one more time to the folks on Zoom. If anyone has a question, you're more than welcome to ask, no matter how small of a question, nothing to be concerned about. You can ask anything you want. And John will watch. Now, what we mentioned earlier is that we're starting in fiscal 22-23 with a new system, which means the first bill that's going to have sewer will be
October 1st.
October 1st. And that will go back to June 1st and through what period?
It'll cover July, August, September. The bill goes out October 1st.
Very good.
Mm.
Okay, so unless anyone has any more questions, that'll be the conclusion of this presentation. Ed, Sean, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure working with you. We'll be in touch shortly. I'm very, very pleased with the outcome. And I'd also like to thank John and Tinka for the tremendous amount of time and effort they put into this. And so I'm really looking forward to getting this going. Right now, remember, everyone, we're trying to raise money like we're doing in the water fund for future repairs. Right now, the way we've been doing that, since we've been putting it into the property taxes, is getting bonds and other things and loans. So we've been paying for it, but this is a way to start self-generating. I'm very pleased that we've accomplished it, and I want to thank my entire board for their cooperation. So with that, thank you very much. And I would like to announce that we will be taking a pause and opening our official public hearing at 10 minutes until 7. So thank you very much. I hope you come back and join us for that meeting. Same login.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Resolutions. I don't know.
Is this the one that I sent you and said